Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. Um, it's been a while. I meant to record another video this month. That is not a book haul or a reading wrap up, and I did, but I didn't plug in my mic properly, and I recorded the whole thing without sound. And I did not work up the motivation yet to re-record the whole thing because it was over 20 minutes of talking. But I'll get to that this month in November. Before I get into it, before I get into the books, thank you very, very, very much. My last video did super well. I got a ton of views. I got like 100 new subscribers. That is amazing. So really, thank you very much to everybody who commented and who watched, and welcome to everybody who's new. Welcome to my little book community or whatever this is. All right, so let's begin. This month of October really did feel like at least 2 months. It felt so incredibly long. And these books, I managed to read 10 of them, with the most of them being very, very short. So, yeah, but it really felt like a lot longer than a month usually feels. I think because I had the perfect balance of being very, very busy and having nothing to do at all. So I think that mix, that sometimes makes time feel longer than it actually is. So let's begin. The first book was a reread of Moshi Moshi by Banana Yoshimoto, which was my reread, which was supposed to help me kind of to get out of my reading slump that I had. And it did help. I don't think I took a whole lot of notes this month about the books, but yeah, I'll sum it up. Banana Yoshimoto's books, they all are like a little bit, they all follow like a very similar plot is what I'm trying to say. This is more of a young adult novel, I would say. I read them all when I was a young adult. I don't know if I would consider myself a young adult still. And I think I've reread almost all of them, and they're just very like comforting books for me. Usually about young people who suffer through some sort of tragedy, and then their life kind of just continues as normal, and they just kind of have to deal with their grief. And that is kind of what most of the books that I read from her are about. And so, yeah, this is about a young 20-year-old girl who just moved out of her parents' house and started working in a cafe, and then her dad passes away in a tragic way. And then her mother just moves in with her, kind of. So she doesn't move back home, but her mother moves in with her, and she works in a cafe. It has a lot of like food writing, culinary writing. It's just a very comforting read, and it's very, how if something terrible happens, then you still kind of have to live your life on a day-to-day basis, and still, still gotta make money, you still gotta eat and work and all that kind of stuff. So as I was saying, more of a young adult novel, but certainly can be enjoyed by not so young adults as well. Next up, I read Frühe Kraniche by Cengiz Aytmatov. I was trying to find the name of the English publication of this, and I couldn't find it. I think this might not have been translated to English, this one, which makes my review of it a little bit obsolete, maybe, for most of you. But I think some of his other works definitely have been translated. Since I read this, I liked this a lot. I have obtained 2 more of his books. Yeah, so this writer, he's from Kyrgyzstan, which is not, it's a very big country, I think, but not a country that I've ever really heard anything about or read anything from. So yeah, and I found out about him and this book on a German speaking channel called Kain und Abel, which if you understand German, it's a big recommendation. He hasn't been uploading very much, but it's one of my favorite book channels. And yeah, this is kind of like a classic coming of age story, I would say, like a Bildungsroman about a young boy called Sultan Murat. It's set in the early years of the Second World War, and most of the kids' dads, they've all gone to war, and some of them have died there, and some of them are missing, and it kind of deals with that, how the children who have had to stay at the home are kind of dealing with that situation, you know? And while, meanwhile they're still being teenagers and they're thinking about the normal teenager things, even though it's 1942 and they're living in the steppe in the middle of nowhere, basically, because they don't live in a city, they live in like a small village. And so because all the men are gone to war, the teenage boys, they have to like work the fields and have to do all the agricultural work that has to be done there. And that's kind of what this book is about. And it's quite a short book. I would say it's like, well, I usually say 150 or less is a novella. This is 153 pages, so you could call this a small novel or a long novella, but definitely something that you can read quite quickly. I noticed that the cover was pretty cool because it has the cranes flying, but if you notice, if you really look at it closely, you see the cranes are upside down, so it's actually, I think it's a reflection from a lake or something, like it's upside down, and I think that is probably one of my favorite covers of books this year. And yeah, so it's a nice saturated story. You have this coming of age, you have this adventure, you have a little bit of romance. The main character, he's in love with a girl, and it felt very immersive to me as a European, very exotic culture. This Kyrgyzstanian culture. So yeah, definitely an author that I'll be on the lookout on. As I was saying, definitely not all or not much of his stuff has been translated, so I'll see if I review all of them. But if you are German, or if you are Russian, or if you understand Russian or German or whatever, then I recommend this dearly. Next up, I felt like reading some nonfiction, so I read the biography of Andreas Baader, who was a German left-wing extremist terrorist, who kind of, in the 60s, that we had in Germany, there were a lot of student protests going on, like basically against the parts of the governments were still pretty right-wing and had like old Nazis in positions like after the world wars, like in the 60s. And there were a lot of protests. There was like a famous commune, like the Commune 1 or K1 in Germany, that probably most people have heard of. And this was kind of a guy who turned into extremism, and he did some pretty despicable things, but like, despite all of that, a lot of people really still liked him and idolized him. And he was a criminal, and he spent a lot of time in prison. And he was still kind of orchestrating everything from prison. He had like a big network of people. They did some crazy stuff. They murdered people, they kidnapped people, they hijacked a plane. They did like all kinds of stuff. And still some people almost idolized him as like a folk hero or something. And because of his crazy life story, this biography almost reads like a novel. Like I think And there has been a novel written about him and about another woman who had a leading position in, or like two other women who had a leading position in his terror organization, that I haven't read yet, but I would like to. Because I don't think you really need to add much to make a novel out of this, because it seems so unreal, you know. And this guy, he was a master manipulator. He always knew what he had to do to get what he wants, you know, and he did. And this was written by two journalists who interviewed, like, I can really appreciate the work that they did. They interviewed, I think, like close to 40 people who were like around him and knew him, and I think they even interviewed his former partner and stuff. And yeah, fascinating story. You always have to remind yourself the terrible things that he did. He doesn't really get portrayed as a likable person very much, but what I found very interesting is that all these different accounts, all these voices from the 40 people that were interviewed, all remember him in such a different way. Like, he really was like a big manipulator. He could be a completely different person to whoever he was talking to. So yeah, fascinating, really fascinating. And you know, I'm always a big fan of biographies. So even though a lot of them are really boring, this one is definitely not. Next up, we got Confessions by Kanai Minato in this like mass market paperback edition. I have read some really good reviews of this book, and I think it was pretty mid. I think it was, you know, I'm not saying it was bad, but it definitely was like a typical mass market paperback and nothing more than that. I've seen this, like, people review this as like one of the most disturbing books ever, and I don't know. It's well, it involves the death of a young child, which I really did not make me feel good. I realized that as I get older, I get a little bit more squeamish or sensitive to this kind of stuff. When I was like a teenager, I watched like the most gruesome horror splatter movies that you can imagine and didn't bat an eye. And, you know, violence against children is really something that I do not like reading about. And yeah, this book definitely had some disturbing elements. It's kind of about a teacher taking revenge on her pupils because they are kind of responsible for the death of her child. It's kind of a twisted narrative, but I don't think it, you know, it didn't pull off the plot twists in a way that was particularly surprising or interesting, and I didn't mind this. I like reading stuff like this every once in a while, but it's definitely not as mind-blowing to me as some of the Goodreads reviews were. So yeah, that's it. Let's get on with it. We got Der Trafikant by Robert Seethaler. This has been translated. The English title is The Tobacconist. Sorry, my camera ran out of battery. I'm just not very good at filming. Anyway, next up is Der Trafikant by Robert Seethaler. And the English title is The Tobacconist. I have never heard the word Trafikant before. I think it's an Austrian word. You know, even though they also speak German, they use some different kinds of words. Because the author is Austrian and this book is also set in Austria. And a Trafikant is someone who works in a Trafik, which is like a little, you know, little corner shop, a little deli where you can buy like newspapers and tobacco and that kind of stuff. This is set in the 30s, just before the Second World War. And this is also kind of a Bildungsroman, I guess. This is also about a boy, a young man, a teenager who has to kind of go to the city from a small little tiny village. He has to go to Vienna and work and make money to support his mom and himself. And he just kind of finds this job at like this little corner shop. And, this goes into the growing Nazi threat at the beginning of the Second World War. This features Sigmund Freud, the real life psychoanalyst guy. He's a character in this novel, which I think was quite an interesting choice to, first of all, take a character who's so, influential but also controversial, and kind of novelize him, put him in this kind of setting. He's already a very, very old man in this book, and him and the protagonist kind of become friends. He kind of experiences, he's not a Jew, but he experiences like the hate and the attacks against the Jews. Freud was a Jew, of course. The fictional owner of the shop that he works in is a Jew, and eventually gets taken away and killed. He falls in love. He kind of learns it's kind of like a city novel, but you know these kind of novels that are just like set in and around the city and kind of encapsulate that life, what it's like. And this is something that I thought was lacking a little bit, for it being set in Vienna and for Vienna being such an important, it kind of sets the stage. All of this is set in Vienna. It could have gone a bit more into the whole city aspect, like mention some real life places. It barely does that, and I think it would have helped the immersion if it did that. And that's really only my only criticism, because apart from that, I really very much like this book. So yeah, nice short read. I think this author, I read one other book by him. I think he should try writing longer books, because this was nice, but it's it's a 250. It's not super short, but I think he could have extended some stuff a little bit more, go more into Sigmund Freud's life, because it doesn't really do that a whole lot. Give characters more backstory, and also write more about the city of Vienna. I think that would have probably elevated this book by by a lot. But yeah, definitely a cool author. Next up, this was kind of at the point of the month where I was like done with all of my uni work for last semester, which already ended a while ago. And I just wanted to have, that gratifying feeling of like blazing through a short little book in a day. And so I read this in one day. I did not take notes. I hadn't read a Hesse in quite a long time, like, I don't even know, like multiple months. And he's my favorite author ever. So it felt a bit weird that I hadn't read any of his stuff for so long, even though I have some stuff, I have some of his books on my pile here, so I just kind of picked one out and I just went through it. I have to confess, I should have taken notes. I don't really remember everything off the top of my head, but it's kind of coming back to me now. So this is called Freunde, Friends, which I found quite interesting because it does not describe a wholesome friendship. It's kind of about jealousy, We have this character, and in typical Hermann Hesse fiction, all of the characters kind of are aspects of himself. They mirror him. The protagonist is called Hans. So yeah, he likes to name all the characters with his own initials, or multiple characters that always have like their name starting with an H, like his own name. And yeah, kind of it seems to be like an uneven friendship. Like one of them seems to have power over the other one. And yeah, kind of takes like a superior role. So it's like a toxic friendship. And then that friendship ends, and Hans finds a new friend who is, while he was the superior one in the previous friendship, that other guy, he's like older than him, and he knows a lot of stuff about like spiritism, and he has a lot of spiritual knowledge, which the character of Hans is interested in, and that Hermann Hesse also was really quite into. And it's kind of mirroring that same uneven dynamic that the previous friendship had. It's just like a short novella. It's kind of like a reflection on this kind of unhealthy friendship, and it's it's a nice little short novella, nothing more and nothing less. I love Hesse. I will always love him, but this is by no means mind blowing. It's just like a short little nice novella that was very nice to squeeze in and very pleasant to read. That's it. Next up. Gewaltfreie Kommunikation und Macht. Nonviolent Communication and Power by Marshall B. Rosenberg. Even though, I think the main book, Gewaltfreie Kommunikation, which is right there, that was written by him. This is just like excerpts of speeches that he gave and workshops. And I actually had to work through this for uni. I'm doing a uni project where I have to like make a presentation about this book, which is pretty cool, honestly. I love nonviolent communication. I love the whole aspect of it. I've been reading a lot about it, and I've been using it. I'm studying. I'm doing my master's degree to be a therapist, an art therapist. So that will probably be very useful. And I think the only real criticism, well, it's not even really criticism. All of this stuff he didn't write himself, and it just feels, I bought this used, and it was still 18 euros. These books are expensive. I got early in the year I read this one. This is about anger and rage, and this was also like, I don't remember, but it was also like way more than it should have been for like 50 pages of text. And this one, yeah, so it was a bit too expensive for my taste, but it's a pretty worthwhile knowledge in my opinion. I'm not gonna go into it too far. I do have my critical thoughts about nonviolent communication, but I'll just keep it short and say that I really like it, and I really think it's if your job is talking to people, then you should probably read this, or at least the main one. And next up, actually a big surprise. I read Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus in this little tiny edition, and this is, I was always really, I learned a little bit about the Greek myths and stuff, and the myth of Prometheus was always one that kind of really interested me. And it just goes, it's a play, this one. It doesn't go into the whole story, it's just kind of him being on the road. He was like the guy who stole the fire from Hephaestus, and then he gave it to the people, and then he got punished by being bound to a rock with chains, and was it a vulture? I think sometimes it's a vulture, sometimes it's a raven, or like a hawk, some bird like pecking on him, eating his liver for all eternity. So eternal suffering basically is his punishment. And yeah, I did not expect to love this. I gave this 5 stars. I wrote in the back here, it made me want to climb the highest summit in a toga and scream this, like recite this into the abyss, because it was fucking that good. It was actually, the language, it's absolutely epic, mind-blowing. I really do feel like this unlocked something for me when it comes to like the Greek poets, the ancient Greek writers. This was a little bit less ancient than some of the other ones, Aeschylus, him and Sophocles and Euripides are kind of like a literary trio of that time. I don't remember when exactly he was alive, who cares, but it was definitely like way later than Homer or some of these other guys. But yeah, man, this really caught me by surprise. I did not expect to love it this much. This was pretty digestible, you know. It's tiny. It's like the actual play is like 41 pages, and then it has like a very long afterword, which I didn't read because it was a little bit too stuck up for me. But yeah, this gave me kind of an experience that I wish I had when I was reading the Iliad. This is what you're supposed to feel, I think, when you read the Odyssey or the Iliad. You know, this, wow, I was very, very immersive, and I loved it. And I'll be on the lookout for more of Aeschylus's works, and also for Sophocles and Euripides, maybe, you know, to kind of get a bigger picture. But yeah, I'm very grateful that this kind of, you know, brought me closer to the old Greek literature. Awesome. And next up, I read The Acacia by Claude Simon, which I for some reason expected to really like, and I don't know, it's not that I felt indifferent about it, it was just extremely hard to read. This is like post-modernism. This is extremely experimental. It's set, well, it's kind of set in World War One and World War Two, because a big aspect of this novel is that it's kind of, well, it's not, it kind of resembles like a father-son narrative, where the father fought in World War One and the son fought in World War Two, and the son kind of remembers stuff, but the characters kind of bleed into each other. It's not, it's like they're, you know, you have all these different time periods, and the narration, it's very experimental, and it's a bit hard to describe for me. But you don't really have set characters. You just have kind of aspects, and they resemble some of the characters, and they kind of bleed into each other, if that makes sense. But yeah, you can't really differentiate between who's who a lot of the time. You have chronologic jumps. You have chapters, you know, sometimes you have chapters that are set over the course of a single day. Sometimes you have chapters that are set over the course of 50 years. Sometimes you have chapters that are chronologically set before the other ones. And then you have one that's set in like 1888, and then you have someone that's set from 1940 to 1945 or whatever. It's quite confusing, I would say. So it's, you know, the time as a factor doesn't, kind of loses its meaning here, and you can sometimes, it's sometimes very hard to figure out what time you're even set in at the current moment, you know, because the technology in World War One and World War Two times was very much quite different. On top of that, this man writes sometimes extremely long sentences, like over 2 to 4 pages, just using commas as punctuation and just not ending those damn sentences. And then he very frequently uses brackets. I don't know if it's gonna focus, but he uses brackets like constantly in every sentence. Sometimes he uses brackets within brackets, like it almost feels like a math equation. And yeah, it is extremely, it's a very difficult book, I will say that. And I will also say that I did enjoy the concept of a postmodern novel set in the World War One and Two times, because that's something I've never read before, and that is definitely something, you know, I feel like most of the postmodern stuff that I read was set in more recent times, you know, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, so the concept of that I really thought was quite nice, but I think to really appreciate this, I would have to read way more of Claude Simon's works before. Someone recommended me The Flanders Road. Maybe that's gonna be a little bit easier. I think I will read that, and maybe one day I will return to this book. I'm not sure if I will, but I do think this is something that you kind of have to learn how to read, you know. But yeah, not a bad book by any means. Just too complicated for me, for now at least. And I did not expect to have another 5-star book. You know, I for this one I took a lot of notes. I didn't say the name. The Plague, or Die Pest in German, by Albert Camus. Man, where do I even start? I had a blast reading this book. Okay, let me start. So this is about the town of Oran in Algeria, being hit by an epidemic, by a plague, by the Black Plague, and a lot of people dying from it, of course. You know, quite reminiscent of something that happened within the last 5 years. You know, probably even worse. So I don't even know. I don't even know where to start. Look, these are my notes. It's quite all over the place. So basically, you have multiple dudes that are kind of characters in this book. It doesn't really feel like you have one set protagonist, because they all kind of play equal parts. What I found very, very cool is that the town, the city itself, and also the plague itself, that they kind of really almost function as characters. Because sometimes, or like quite frequently, you have chapters where it doesn't feature any human characters. It just kind of talks about the city, which is obviously like a whole bunch of people all together. But you have those, and you have the plague, and them kind of interacting. Almost, yeah, it almost kind of humanizes them, or like makes them feel like they are actual like players in this play, or like in this novel. You also have a character that's the narrator, who I also found very, very interesting, because it feels like an omniscient narration, you know, but then sometimes he talks about himself as the narrator, which gives... I found that very, very interesting, and I've very rarely read something like this, you know. Usually you have like a first-person narration or third-person narration, or like an omniscient narration, and this is kind of a first-person omniscient narration, you know. You have kind of a narrator that functions like between those said categories of narration, which I found quite interesting. And if you read this book, I would like to hear your thoughts if he's an unreliable narrator or not. Because he kind of mentions that he is like an actual person involved in this story, but he says that he wants to stay anonymous, which I've also found really, really cool. Yeah. Then it really... It kind of, you know, the plot follows like this kind of a standard structure where it goes like upwards, and the tension is rising and rising and rising, and that kind of correlates with the plague spreading and infecting more and more and more people. And yeah, it was very, very cool to really like... I really focused on the storytelling aspect, how the story was built and how it was structured, and I thought, yeah, that Camus is definitely deserving of the Nobel Prize. I like this way more than The Stranger. I think The Stranger was great, but I think this really kind of shows what this man is capable of writing. Yeah, you've have some discussions here. You have a priest given a sermon from, you know, this like standard Catholic perspective, and then later on you have two characters like kind of having a discussion about God and belief, like very existentialist, of course, in Camus fashion. It reminded me of like something that like Dostoevsky would write, like in The Great Inquisitor, where the story kind of takes a break and you just go into like an essay, basically, almost, you know. And I also very much enjoyed that. And then I don't know, you know, I thought the ending was gonna be predictable, and it was. And I was like, well, this is, you know, you have like this plague spreading out. You have all these characters that are like acting and doing something. Of course, one of them is gonna die, and that's gonna be the end. And I don't think that is much of a spoiler. If you think this is, I'm sorry, but this is, I think this is something that is quite predictable. And but then the ending, you know, it happened as exactly as I thought it would, but somehow it still blew me away, you know. It was, there was, I think there was something that I've never read before in that kind of way, where it happened exactly as I had predicted it, but I still, you know, it still gave me that same feeling as if I hadn't. I don't know how to describe that better, but this was definitely probably my favorite book of this month. Very, very, very closely followed by this, which is so different that you can't even really compare it. But yeah, this is a big recommendation. This is definitely gonna, well, it's definitely gonna be in one of my favorite lists that I'm gonna make for this year. I'm gonna make a lot of content, like yearly reading wrap up kind of stuff, you know. I'm gonna probably make at least 3-4 videos about that in December when it's time. So you'll see this book again. So yeah, I also found a ton more Camus recently. I found some essays, literary essays, and also some more novels. So I'll be reading a lot more by him in the future. But as of now, that's it for this month. I'll reshoot that other video that I had the corrupted footage of. That you should expect that probably in the middle of this month. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.